That was Mama. She's in London. She's staying with Rosamond.
She can't be. She was here for lunch. She didn't say anything.
She went up this afternoon. She'll be back tomorrow, so I've asked her to come for tea. You must persuade her to leave Maud Bagshaw alone.
I don't believe even Mama will pick a quarrel in front of the king.
I wonder if he can come early.
Are you excited?
I am a bit. Are you?
Would it be common to admit it?
Not to an American.
And that's a clip from Downton Abbey. I'm delighted to say that Lord Grantham, Robert Crawley, Hugh Bonneville, all of those is in the studio. How you doing, Hugh?
Very good. Nice. I'm sorry, you're suffering a little bit.
I'm a little bit throaty, but you know the show has to go on. I'm thinking Dr. Footlights may well help me out.
Through.
You just finished a run of playing C.S. Lewis.
Shadowlands earlier in the year. That's right, down at Chichester.
What do you do if your throat starts to go?
Well, do you know it's quite, for those who don't know the show, it's about C.S. Lewis and the late flowering romance, and then terrible tragedy befalls, and the final scene is quite an emotional breakdown. And we only did a 4-week run, but on the morning after I finished it, I woke up with absolutely no voice, and it took 3 days for my voice to come back. So I think your body does sort of get you through when it needs to, gets you through stuff, and then it just shuts down and says, that's enough, you're going to rest now. So I hope you have a little time to recover over the weekend.
Thank you. I saw Nigel Hawthorne in that play. It's a fantastic...
It is. It's
extraordinary
quite,
play. So Downton Abbey is back, and... It's 3 years, is it, since the...
Yes, we finished the show in 2016.
So when you walk off, having done that, with astonishing success over 6 series, did you think we're going to come back? I mean, there's been talk of the movie for a while, but then there always is. I mean, what were you thinking?
Well, actually, Gareth Neame, our executive producer, had first talked to some of us about it in season 5 and said, do you think there would be an appetite amongst the cast? Because we certainly think there is an appetite in the audience. And I sort of said good luck with that, because trying to herd the 15 or so cats into a recognisable posse de return was going to be very challenging. And so all credit to him and to Julian Fellows. And actually it's a testament to the atmosphere within the cast that we did all link arms and jump in together, because it wouldn't have worked if only 2 of us had said yes, and recast everything else. So I thought when we finished the final series, there was a sense of farewell, but also we sort of thought there was a good chance it would come back. And then Julian spent 18 months or more just getting the script right, in the right shape, and then it was down to them to try and pull us all in together, and we managed to get the planets to align.
Compare and contrast playing the same character for the big screen as opposed to the small. Maybe there isn't any.
There isn't. To be honest, I don't think there is. I mean, not in terms of the acting style or the acting content. It's really the sense of scale of the actual piece, and the cinematography, and I think elements of the art department, costume, that sort of thing, are just aware that the scale of what they're doing is going to be even more scrutinised because it's on a larger canvas, literally. So the set piece scenes are that bit more grand, the camera angles or the shots are that bit more epic, if you like. The story itself is fairly simple. I mean, it's raised its own game in that instead of the Crawleys being the top of the tree as they have been for 6 years, there's suddenly another branch above them, which is the royal family, who are going to come and play their part in the story. So that everything does get notched up a bit. But in terms of the actual the way that we shot it, I think Michael Engler, our director, who directed some of the TV show, he knew that it needed a sense of scale, and Ben Smithard is a very terrific cinematographer, I think does give it that lush, big feel, particularly for the set piece sequences.
I think it's fair to say that it delivers exactly what people want. That's my take on it. There is no radical psychedelic departure.
Absolutely.
There's nothing that's going to make the fans go, what on earth is happening here? So that it does have that sense of grandeur. Maybe that comes because the King and Queen have visited, but it feels appropriately supersized.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I when I first read the script, I thought, Oh, I see. So it's sort of like a bigger episode of the show. And then I thought, well, why wouldn't it be? Because if you'd suddenly had them all going off to the south of France on some great big epic yacht adventure, the audience would have said, well, where's the house? Where are some of the principal characters aren't there anymore, or whatever. So I absolutely see why Julian wasn't going to reinvent the wheel with the movie version, and as you say, has sort of supersized the show. Now that, if it works as a movie and if the fans go with it, then maybe there could be other adventures further afield. But I think as long as the house always remains the central character, I think that's what audience will accept.
And what a house! What a house it is!
Something. It's an amazing place. I've been back there a couple of times recently for various reasons, and it does have, every time I come up the driveway, you can't help but, when you glimpse the turrets, have this sort of sense of,
it's mine.
I wish. Well, actually, I don't wish. I wouldn't want Lord Carnarvon's heating bills, but the sense of this place it has its place in the landscape, and now a place in many millions of people's hearts.
The year is 1927. How much of what's happening in the outside world leaks into your story? So that obviously, there is a very funny reference to the general strike, with Maggie Smith having, again, all the good lines. But this is a time of austerity, and there are other big stately piles which are going through hard times. How much of the real 1927 comes into your story?
Well, funnily enough, Julian did actually write a draft that was much more to do with that sense of social unrest and social strife. And I think then there was a feeling with, is that what a Downton audience will want at this time when, let's face it, we are going through confusing times ourselves?
Are we?
And I think quite rightly he thought he put a pause on that idea, and instead went down this route of the King and Queen coming to stay. And so there's a much lighter tone to this than an earlier draft that he'd thought up. And I think that's entirely appropriate. So yes, 1927, the real 1927 creeps in, but particularly in terms of the royal family themselves, because the King and Queen's daughter was married to Lord Lascelles, and so he's
a grumpy git.
He's a grumpy git. And they actually ended up shooting some of the scenes in Harewood or Harwood House. Harewood House, I can't remember how you pronounce it. It's bound to be pronounced strangely, even though it's spelt obviously.
You're Robert Crawley, I think you should know.
And Harwood House was actually the seat or the home of Lord Lascelles. So that was a nice bit of fiction actually taking on fact. But I'm trying to think of any other. I can't think of any other social references that are.
The things that could. Irish nationalism has come into the story before.
Yeah.
And that's there. I'm trying not to give too much away. But also, there is a gay subplot, which I thought was interesting without giving the story away, but also being aware that in some of the 220 territories that Grantham is shown in, homosexuality is still illegal, and so I just thought it was. I thought it was well handled and interesting that Julian Fellowes chose to.
It would be yes. That did strike me actually, because he does. It's no surprise to say that it's the character of Thomas whose homosexuality has been explored a bit in the series, and there's a particularly important storyline thread through the story for him in the film. And as I was watching it, I was thinking there are certain areas of the world where the affection for the show is very strong, but there are certain topics within the show that will not sit comfortably, or even in some cases be illegal. And I think it's very bold of Julian to say, actually, no, we're telling this story as it should be, and about an era when homosexuality in Britain was illegal, and then the consequences of that. So it's never going to be. It's never trying to sort of fly the flag of radicalism or new thought. But within the world of Downton, the fictional world of Downton, Julian does, I think, address certain topics sometimes with a great deal of I think sensitivity and certainly in this case compassion.
Lord Grantham could have been any kind of lord, couldn't he? Could have been autocratic. He could have been horrible. He could have been. Maybe we wouldn't have stayed with the program for quite as long as we have done. But I wonder if. He feels to me as though he's developing into, considering he's an earl with a stately pile, a fairly liberal kind of peer, although I also read that Julian Fellows said he'd definitely be a Brexiteer.
Yeah, I read that too, and I've always said that says more about Julian Fellows than it does about Lord Grantham, in my opinion. But no, what I always liked about the character, and certainly in the first season when I first read it, was that he was a conservative, but with a liberal spirit, and a slowly progressive spirit. I mean, it takes him, sometimes he's taken kicking and screaming into the next moment of progress. But certainly now, I think in the film, his own place in the world of Downton is set. It's fair to say that it's not his. The film isn't his story. It's to others to drive the story. But I think his sense of compassion. I think,
yes.
And I think that's true in all the characters. Julian always writes from the default position that people do try to be good in the world, and there aren't just goodies and baddies. People do bad things, but it's usually out of a reason for survival or something like that. And he explores, I think, each of the characters with that sense of compassion, and that's probably what the audiences have responded to.
We're sitting in a BBC studio, and I can see the temporary pass that you've been given with your photograph in the front. And I'm just sort of very much aware of the fact that when you come in here, it's almost like a home from home.
Well, it is because of W1A, the Fly on the Wall documentary. Comedy that we shot here over several years. It's lovely to be back, I must say, and to see that some things never change.
Painful drama is how I'd actually describe it. And I remember you last time you came in. I don't know whether it was for Monuments Men, but you showed Mark and me how to fold a bike, because there are genuinely those fold-away bikes on all these floors.
I know. I keep bumping into people who have those fold-away bikes, and I still can't, even after whatever it was, several series, I'm still not able to fold them very well.
And sometimes it sparks back into life. It was a couple of months ago when, actually, I think it was end of last year maybe, Jenny Eclair on Twitter said, "What is BBC Sounds and how does it differ from BBC Radio?" To which can you read out your tweet? Because you're not on Twitter quite as much as you used to.
No, I used to be a lot, and I'm not so much now. But so Jason Watkins and I occasionally, comment on something that's in the news. With the hashtag W1A. But anyway, Jenny had said, "What is BBC Sounds, please, and how does it differ from BBC Radio?" And so myself, in the manner of Ian Fletcher, said, "It's a good question, Jenny, and we're glad you've asked it. Part of our More of Less initiative, BBC Sounds is a condensation of BBC Radio and BBC Noise, which in 2020 will be repurposed as BBC Echo, a great big empty hall, probably in Kidderminster." And that seemed to strike a chord. And Jason Watkins, as his character, Simon Hayward, who was the sort of head of nothingness really within the BBC, said, "If I can just pipe myself on board and join the soundscape here, not wanting to bang drums or bang anything else either, but I champion BBC Noise, trademark. You guys will know better than I do how things will turn out, but we have great hopes for BBC Din, trademark."
It was a lovely exchange. Thank you. And in doing Robert Crawley and Ian Fletcher, as you've just done, and Mr. Brown in Paddington, you have kind of established, you are a national treasure. You three fantastic, you have many other, but recently they're three extraordinary roles.
Yes, they're three sort of, if you like, father figures trying to muddle through, basically.
Okay. There's a similarity. Do you think there'll be more Paddington? What's the vibe?
I ran into David Heyman, the producer, not so long ago, and he said, "Oh yes, we're looking at a third Paddington." But what was so refreshing was he said, "But we're not going to make it unless it's a good script." Rather than, we've got to jump on the bandwagon and make another one. He said, "No, there's no point in doing it because the first two were so, everyone was so proud of the first two that they worked and were true to the spirit of Michael Bond. And why don't cynically do a third one unless it's really in the same territory." So that was heartening to hear from a producer who's always got one eye on the budget.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people, I thought Paddington 2 was better than Paddington 1, and I love Paddington 1, so.
Yeah.
And just one final thing before you go. I don't think I've seen you since Monuments Men and your appearance on the Graham Norton show. So we did an interview for that film. But my guess is, that's one of my favourite ever sequences, and it's you and Matt Damon and Bill Murray.
Yeah.
And now my guess is that there was some wine involved But that was one of the best sequences of television I've ever seen.
You didn't realise it at the time, but it was quite memorable looking back on it.
You do remember it?
I do remember it. It was all Bill Murray's fault, who kept basically making sure that the wine glasses were topped up, or the champagne glasses were topped up. And we ended up drinking champagne out of Paloma Faith's shoe, I believe.
You actually got up and left half up.
Yeah, because in my naivety, because he kept making us drink. We'd bearing in mind we'd started at the hotel at sort of 5 o'clock to have a pre-premiere celebratory drink together as the cast, snifter. Then we end up at the Odeon Square, where you're given another little snifter, and then you're taken to Graham Norton, and he encourages you to have a drink. And Bill Murray is meanwhile sort of basically topping up your drinks the whole time. A gentleman of my age, halfway through, I thought, I can't do this now. I'm going to have a pee. And I thought, they'll chop this bit out. Well, of course they didn't.
It was fantastic. What do we see you next, Hugh?
I did a little cameo on a film called Jingle Jangle, which is a Netflix movie, which is going to be a gorgeous Christmas movie, not for this year, but for next, which we just finished shooting.
Hugh Bonneville, thank you. Nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you. Thanks.